Hi guys. So in a very timely manner, Ota decided to release the Octane Render 2019 for the brand new Blender 2.8. And with it comes the change that it's now free. Well, at least free for up to one GPU, but that's pretty cool already to have a fully functional Octane within a new Blender with all the new features, and it is basically free. So if you add free Blender to free Octane, that's a really cool opportunity here, I think, for a lot of people. So in order to install that, we need to go to this website here and download it. So what you're downloading here is essentially the free version of Octane and also a version of Blender. It's currently available for Windows. So yeah, you can download that, and then let's see what we have actually once you download it. So you get a zip file, and then you have these two folders here. It's called 20.0-v9_prime. So in order to launch it, you need to first of all go into the server prime folder and then launch the Octane server. And then you need to make sure that you have it here in your system tray. You can see here Octane Render Prime 2019.1 RC3 is running. And then we can go back, go to client, and then to find the blender.exe and then double click that. And then it should work. So here we are. It's based on 2.8 release candidate 2. So a few things we need to do before is that you want to go into edit preferences. Nothing is going to show up here under CUDA, so don't get worried about that. But we do need to go under add-ons. We need to search for Octane, and you need to enable this here, render Octane render engine. You need to enable that. Without that, it's not going to work. You can see there's a few options here. And then we need to go here in our render engine tab and select Octane. And then you have all the usual things here. And then you can click under viewport shading, and then it will quickly load. Or not so quickly. It needs a second to load. And then here we are. Doesn't look like much right now because there's really nothing in our scene, but we'll get to that in a second. I wanted to start just with a little overview because I think a lot of things are still not working that we're used to from other versions of Octane or the standalone, because it is still very early days and it's just an experimental build, so to speak. Let me just throw in a plane. Make it a bit bigger so we can see some shadows. I like to add, we need to go into the shader editor, so we need to get used to working with nodes. If you haven't gotten used to that already, you want to operate it in the same area that you operate on Eevee and Cycles shaders. So once we selected our render engine Octane here, we have a lot of the usual settings, kernel type and all sorts of stuff here. We can adjust everything. It's kind of squeezed in down there. It's a bit hard to find, but it's okay. So first of all, let's start it up. So you see we have this here. We also see that the lights have no effect. So the lights from Blender don't work yet. Even though you have some options here, but we could go into the light. We could go here, say use nodes, and then you actually get a tune point light that they say you can use, but I haven't gotten it to work. There's no effect on anything. Let's set up quickly an environment. So we go into the environment settings here, and we want to say Octane environment, and let's do a daylight one. So once we go here into world, we can see that underworld output. The surface doesn't really have any effect, but we need to go under Octane environment. We have a new option here. Hope you can see this. And here you can either do your settings here or here. So we can click and drag down. And you see that the light has no effect. There are other lights, but they either say spotlight is not supported, but these all, as far as I know, have no effect on the scene. So we can either choose to load an HDRI, we can have the daylight environment, planetary environment, all these kind of things, and then we can play around with them here. You can also, we can set up materials for our objects. So this one already has one, but you see here that that is the principled BSDF from Blender. We don't need that, that's not compatible. We need to go Shift A in the shader editor and then actually choose a new shader for this one. Or if you establish a new one, it's going to switch to universal material by default, but people who are used to these kind of guys can choose those, and we can play around with it here. You can switch this off. You can look at your beautiful cube here, and then it pretty much behaves the same way as we're used to from other Octane versions, whether it be Modo, Cinema 4D, or the standalone. It works pretty much the same way. Also, what is quite curious is that we have no other options. So it's a custom build from Blender, right? And you can't just download any build from Blender and then expect it to work. It's like you have to use the one that comes with the one that you download from Octane, otherwise it will not work. And there's no EV materials, so you cannot set up side by side EV materials and other materials. So you could do it in a way that you say the material output is only for Octane, and then you would set another one like copy paste, and then you say this one is for Eevee, but it doesn't work because we have no shaders. You see, we have no shaders at all in here, so all that kind of stuff is deactivated for some reason. So we can't use that. We can't use that yet. And I made a couple of copies here because I'm cool. So yeah, so if you download this version, you pretty much only have Octane as a render option. Even if we go in here and say we want to do Eevee, it's here, but now we have nothing available at all. So we need to go back to Octane. Also, I heard that the LiveDB connection doesn't work yet, so we can't drag and drop any materials in. But yeah, pretty much everything else I think is working. There's some quirks that we'll get into. But yeah, so I want to load up my scene and have a look how that will work. I've loaded my scene now into Blender. And of course, since I did all the material selection and definition and everything already before in Modo, it just loads in fine. I'm using FBX here. You can use OBJ, whatever you feel like. But so all my materials are of course defined and named. You can do that here in Blender as well, the same way as I did in Modo. The only change here is that, I mean, I haven't duplicated this one. Because it's just for testing purposes here. I also took the spaceman out to kind of simplify it and put that lady in here, so I can just add that scan texture onto her, and we have a figure in here. But the rest is pretty much all the same. I have all my extra spheres here. I have my alarm thing here. And of course I can fully edit everything to enable that one. Pressing T brings this one in so I can have my gizmo to move this lady around. I like her to stand here so that she gets lit up by these green orbs. Maybe I want to turn her around. And you can already see I already set up the shaders, and then I can walk you through it. I chose a texture environment that is completely black. So my room is completely lit by the artificial lights that I have in here, and everything will be driven by emissive textures, emissive black body emissions or texture emissions. Just like exactly like we did it in the Octane standalone, since that one also does not have any like native lights, so to speak. So the setup is going to be very similar. And we'll see how close we can get to what it looks like in the standalone. I'm choosing also path tracing. It's quite slow. I'm actually recording this on a laptop because it's only available for Windows, and I don't have a Windows desktop. So the performance is a bit slower, and it's also only one GPU, and it's, well, experimental. So be prepared to take a hit on performance. Nevertheless, it's interesting to play around with this and what it can do. The settings you can do however you like, or you can just replicate your settings that you have in the standalone or your other plugins. I don't want to get too much into that because you can check it in the other tutorials, I think. One thing is that even though you can set your dimensions here and you can choose your camera view, you cannot do viewport render image, and you also cannot do render image. That does not work yet. So all you can do right now is play around in the viewport and see the viewport shading done by Octane. And I think it's also like, I don't know if it's the final quality or if it's a preview quality. So that's also something we have to keep in mind. But I'm sure as new versions are released, they're going to add all these features. Or maybe they'll retain it for their paid version, since it's free after all. But this one, in terms of features, will give you most of what Octane can do. I'm also missing the post-processing features, the imager. Maybe that's hidden somewhere else, but I cannot find it, or maybe it's not there yet. We do have the options for all the passes, but of course we can't get the passes out yet since we can't render the image. Do we have any options here? No, we don't. Okay. But the most important thing that we can learn and we can do is the lighting and the shading. So we can see how I set up some of this stuff. If we click on the emissions, which is going to be one of the important parts here. So you see how I built this exactly the same way as I did in the standalone. So you have your material output, right? You always click Shift A, and then you can go to the shader. You can choose the diffuse material, which is that one here. And then I create the black body emission, which is under Octane emission. Choose that black body, that gives you this guy here, and then I need to actually choose a color. So that is under Octane texture, RGB spectrum texture. And then you can here, from the color wheel, select your color. So this one is here, the one for the screen. I always enable surface brightness, and then the power is a bit tricky. I realized that you cannot use the same kind of power settings that you did in the standalone. I have to dial them way down. Like I have to go to 2 instead of something like 100 in order to get the same kind of effect. So that's something you have to play around with. In the beginning, I had all like crazy atomic lights everywhere because I used the same settings as before, which of course did not work. So I went through and replicated all the settings here. So for example, the walls, right? So the walls were done via dragging like something in from the live DB and then altering it. So it's actually a mixed material between a diffuse and a glossy. And then so I added like a dirt scratchy texture on top of it, plugging it into both the roughness channels and then going in via box projection. In addition to, like, for example, if you add a box projection in the standalone, you just get the box projection thing with the scale handle together, right? So, but if you go into projection here and say box, we just get this thing. And we have to plug in the transformation separately. So we go Octane transform, then you can, depending on what you want to do, if you just want to scale it, which is fine for 2D textures, then you can say scale transform. And then you just have this one here and can play around with it. You can click and drag, to select all of these at the same time and then scale them up or down. You can also add a 3D transform if you also want to rotate them or translate them or do more with your texture. So you can do that as well. And then you connect these up and then it's all good. I realized I had to scale the textures like a lot more to get the same effect. I wonder where that comes from. Not too sure, but yeah, you need to kind of play around with it a bit, because not all these settings will carry over exactly like from the standalone. Maybe Blender's usually takes into consideration the scale of these actual objects and not like ignores it, like for example or to a certain degree ignores it, like the standalone does. So again, we need to play around with that. So this is the wall shader that I built here. It's kind of like a plasticky, shiny paint look. Of course, here we do not have the ability to quickly, like, let's say I want to add this material to a different object that has a different material. Like if I want to go to this one, like I have no option to like connect it here, because I do not have this like big Octane tree where I can quickly reconnect everything, which is one of the good things about the standalone. So what I would have to do is like you have to actually like drag a box here, a rectangle, and then Control C and then go into the other shader and then Control V, which is still pretty fast. But the thing is, if you make the changes, like if I make the changes here and I want the other material also to update, then I can't do that. Then I have to do it separately and they're not interlinked, which is a bit of a bummer, but well, that's the trade-off. But I have full 3D app here where I can do everything, which I cannot do in Octane, of course, since that's only for rendering. So what else do we have? So you can see if once I click on one of these, because I have multiple materials on this mesh, I can click through these and see what I have. I deactivated this light here that you know from before. We have another shader which is kind of this like reddish. We have it here as well, this reddish translucent material. So we have like a specular and a glossy mixed together, which is these lines up here, which you might have seen in the other final renders. And it's a mixture of a specular, which is kind of usually used for a glass shader. We making it, and by mixing it with a solid material, we kind of create something like half translucent, kind of really thick, plasticky, but still see-through kind of material, which is quite cool. So you can check it out and play around with it. Other shaders we have, the ceiling is the most complicated, which is this part here. It actually only occupies a small part here, but I used that one for also the other shader to create this like greenish, yellowish breakup patterns. I didn't recreate the entire thing in Blender, but just I wanted to get only one lighting scenario to see how it all works together here. So that's a bit more tricky but I could rebuild it. It is a bit tricky, but I could rebuild it. So it's a mix of a diffuse and glossy with like some dirt textures in the roughness channel, and some additional pattern in the normal channel to give me a bit of a bump. Again, each has its own box projection and 3D transform, so I can rotate and scale it. And then the amount is driven by a mixed texture of two images. So the mixed texture, like this amount channel will basically drive how these two textures here are blended by a third texture. In this case, a third and a fourth, to give different kind of, like, you can see that this texture will decide whether something is diffuse or something is glossy. That's basically how it works. It's the same way that I've built the shader in the Octane standalone. What else do we have here? So here we have again the walls material, the alarm, which is just a simple red emission, very low brightness, very low power. We have the white little lights, also very, very low power. The pipes are like, I used a metal material and added some scratches in the roughness channel and dialed the specular way down so it's not like completely reflective, shiny. The metal material is very helpful for these kind of things. I'm trying to see what else we still have. Yeah, there's like a plasticky material that I recreated. Again, it was based on something I dragged out of the LiveDB and just like slightly manipulated the settings. So it's a diffuse and glossy mix again between a darker diffuse and a somewhat grayish glossy material to get more like subtle effects. And I think this one is the same one. I just copy and pasted it. Wasn't so important for this one to get different ones. We can, for example, change it a little bit by making it a bit brighter by changing the diffuse channel, and also making this less rough or more rough, to be precise, so it's less shiny. Let me show you a little bit on how this works here, and it's a bit slow though, so please be prepared for that. It's not the fastest, especially with all the lights enabled. So now we need to wait until all the shaders updated, all the materials are loaded, all the geometry is loaded, which will of course take a short while, and my computer's fans are turning on to tell me that he's working. So here it says sending all these things to the server. What exactly the server is doing, I'm not too sure. Maybe we can ask an expert there. So you can see it takes a while. It is quite slow. Even the standalone was a fair bit slower on 2 GPUs with all these interior lights and reflections, and yeah, I went a bit crazy with all the reflections. So yeah, then he has to work a lot to get this done. But I think it looks pretty good. I didn't dare put any volumetrics in there because I think then it would have just died. Let me see if we can change maybe the kernel to direct line. That should be a bit faster, even though it looks maybe a bit different. Yeah, it's a bit too dark. So one of the big differences in how this also looks is that direct lighting seems to be just in general a little bit darker. So you need to bump up all those materials. The emissions, you need to bump them up quite a bit. So we have the sphere here. Let's see if we can, since I want my main lights to be coming out of the green, if we can bump that up. Let's see the power. Let's multiply it by 10. Yeah, okay. So this is getting a bit brighter here. So that's pretty cool. I mean, I would usually choose path tracing for the final render, since the quality overall is, I think, a bit more refined. But I think for the demo purposes here, we can totally leave that. The thing is now that we might have to change all lighting to a bit brighter. Otherwise, we're not going to see anything. We're not going to see all these different lights that I've made everywhere. I mean, the alarm light we can see. But I think it's pretty successful that with mostly the same settings, or like 95% of the same settings, I do really get a very similar or almost equal result to the standalone. And it's really cool to have this complete setup here in Blender. And did I mention it's free? I mean, that's pretty amazing. I think there needs to be some testing done maybe to see how you can get the same quality, the same setup, if you can get that, and how it would look like in Eevee and Cycles, and how that would overall compare to each other, and if Octane would be a lot faster. Of course, there we hit the problem that Cycles can make use of more GPUs, whereas the free version of Octane can only support one GPU. But you see, I mean, even after a minute or so, like, okay, 44 seconds, this is pretty great already. Of course, it's noisy, but it looks pretty good, I think, with all the reflections and everything. And I think it definitely was worth the wait. If you were ever curious about Octane but you didn't really felt the need to, I don't know, spend the money on it, or was always a bit holding off, I think now is a great time to like start jumping in and learn a little bit about how Octane works, and how maybe compared to Cycles it can help your workflow, or, well, maybe it doesn't help you. I think it's still, the verdict is still out on whether this is like better than Cycles, or which one to use. I think it's still too early to say, but it's a fantastic option, I think, to consider for, I mean, everyone. It's pretty amazing now that you get like Blender for free 2.8. It's amazing. Just the final version just came out, and then you also get Octane, the latest version of Octane, for free. That's pretty damn amazing for, I think, everyone. And I mean, the result, I think, speaks for itself. Really speaks for itself. So yeah, you can pretty much change all sorts of stuff here. And then hopefully in the future we can get proper render view, and can save out all the passes and get all the features that, or most of the features that the standalone has, because then I think good times are ahead. So yeah, I give you the setup to play with in this tutorial, of course minus some of the kit bash parts, because I'm not allowed to give these away as part of a package I'm selling. But I mean, 95% of the corridor will be like that. and then you can drop in your own figures and you can play around with all the setup. The blend file will be included, so you can play around with all the textures and material setups and create your own corridors out of either these parts, or make different parts, make your own, design your own. So yeah, that's it for this time, and I hope you're gonna really have fun with this. I think it's a great new solution for everybody to play with, and see you guys next time.